November 8th, 2016. Kensington Palace issued a statement that had never been issued before. Prince Harry, 26 months away from his father taking the throne, published a direct public attack on the British press. Not a gentle correction, not palace speak about regrettable inaccuracies. He used the phrase racial undertones to describe coverage of his American girlfriend. He used the word smear without qualification. The statement went out without the approval of Buckingham Palace communications staff, who learned about it 15 minutes before publication. That margin, 15 minutes between family and institution, measured the distance Harry had already travelled. The statement itself mattered less than what it proved. He no longer trusted the system to protect the people he loved. He had watched that system fail once before. This time, he was not waiting for permission. The public read the statement as protective. Harry's own staff read it as a declaration of independence. The silence from Buckingham Palace afterward was not neutral. It was a judgment. That statement did not create the rupture. It confirmed something already broken. The question is when the break occurred. Harry has given different answers at different times. In interviews, he points to specific moments, a refused correction here, a planted story there. But trust does not collapse at a single point. It erodes. The timeline matters because it explains not just what Harry did, but what he believed the palace was capable of doing. And that belief, once formed, could not be unformed by anything except evidence to the contrary. The palace never offered that evidence. What follows is not a case for or against Harry's decisions. It is an account of how those decisions became inevitable. The evidence is public. The witnesses are named. The question is only how to weigh what happened. Harry was born into an institution that had been managing its image for 1,000 years. The House of Windsor, the name itself chosen in 1917 to sound less German during a war against Germany, understood that survival meant controlling the narrative. By the time Harry was born in 1984, that control depended on a three-way relationship between palace, press, and public. The palace provided access, the press provided coverage, the public provided loyalty. Everyone understood the terms. Favorable stories earned continued access. Critical stories meant exclusion from the next tour, the next photo opportunity, the next background briefing. It was not corruption, it was management. Harry grew up inside this system without understanding it. To a child, the photographers outside Kensington Palace were simply part of the landscape, like the guards at the gates. His mother tried to explain. Diana told both sons that the cameras were not their friends. But she also used those cameras in ways Harry was too young to understand. The famous photographs, Diana alone at the Taj Mahal, Diana in the AIDS ward, touching patients without gloves, were not accidents. They were messages. Diana had learned to speak through images because speaking directly was forbidden. When she died in a Paris tunnel on August 31st, 1997, the official explanation was paparazzi pursuit. The unofficial explanation, whispered in certain circles but rarely printed, was more complicated. Diana had spent the summer on a yacht in the Mediterranean. The palace had no control over that narrative. The photographs of Diana with Dodi Fayed ran worldwide. The day before her death, the palace press office was managing William and Harry's arrival at Balmoral. They were not managing Diana's story. That loss of control made certain people in the palace nervous. The nervousness did not cause the crash, but it shaped what happened afterward. Harry was 12. He walked behind his mother's coffin on television. 2 million people lined the streets. The palace's first instinct had been to keep the funeral small and private. Public pressure changed that calculation within 48 hours. The image of 2 young boys in dark suits became the defining photograph of the funeral. Harry later said he remembered nothing of the walk. What he remembered was the sound, not individual voices, but a sustained note of grief from crowds he could not see. The palace told him it was necessary. Necessary for what, exactly? They did not specify. William was old enough to be angry about the decision. Harry was not. He accepted what he was told. For years afterward, he defended the walk. Only later did he recognize it as a choice made for institutional reasons, not personal ones. The distinction matters. The palace was not cruel. It calculated, and in that calculation, the visibility of the prince's grief served a purpose. It generated sympathy. Sympathy translated to public support for the monarchy at a moment when that support was uncertain. Harry understood this only in hindsight. Understanding it changed how he weighed every subsequent decision the palace made about his life. The British press operates under a system of voluntary regulation. There is no First Amendment protection. There are libel laws, privacy laws, laws against phone hacking. None of these prevented what happened next. Between 1997 and 2006, journalists hacked the voicemails of thousands of people, including members of the royal family. The hacking was systematic, it was profitable, and it was ignored by editors and executives who knew exactly what their reporters were doing. The public did not learn the full scale until years later, after arrests and trials and parliamentary inquiries. But the palace knew earlier than that. They knew because their own security discovered the breaches. And they made a choice about what to do with that knowledge. In 2006, Clive Goodman, a royal correspondent for the News of the World, was arrested for hacking phones belonging to palace staff. The palace cooperated with the investigation. Goodman went to prison. The News of the World apologized. Everyone agreed this was one reporter acting alone. That agreement was false. The palace's lawyers knew it was false. They had evidence of wider hacking, including calls to Harry's own phone. They chose not to pursue it. The reasoning was pragmatic. Pursuing it meant confronting the entire tabloid industry. That confrontation would make enemies. Better to accept the limited victory and preserve the relationship. Harry learned about this decision only years later, during the second round of phone hacking revelations in 2011. By then, he was old enough to ask questions. The answer he received was, it had been handled. Handled meant contained. Contained meant the palace had prioritized institutional relationships over protecting individual family members. Harry filed this information away. It was not yet a breaking point. It was evidence in a case he had not yet decided to make. Military service gave Harry distance from the palace system. He joined the army in 2005 and served for 10 years. In Afghanistan, the chain of command was clear. Orders came down. You followed them, or you questioned them directly. There was no briefing culture, no anonymous sourcing, no managing of narratives through proxies. Harry thrived in that environment. His commanding officers said he was a competent officer, but not exceptional. What made him valuable was his willingness to be treated like everyone else. The tabloids called him "Our Brave Harry" and ran heroic photographs. The truth was more ordinary. He did his job, kept his head down, and appreciated the lack of cameras. When he returned to civilian life in 2015, the contrast was sharp. Every public appearance required coordination with the palace press office. Every photograph required approval. Every interview question was negotiated in advance. Harry's private secretaries explained this was protection. But protection from what? From uncontrolled coverage. And who decided what coverage needed controlling? The same people who maintained relationships with the editors and reporters doing the covering. Harry started to see the circularity of it. In November 2016, he met Meghan Markle in London. She was an American actress with a successful cable television career. She was biracial. She had been married before. None of these facts were secret. All of them became problems the moment her relationship with Harry went public. The first tabloid stories appeared within weeks. The tone was set immediately. Harry's girl is, almost, straight out of Compton. The subtext was not subtle. Harry's team asked for corrections. The Palace press office declined to intervene. Their reasoning? The relationship was too new, not yet official, not worth spending political capital with editors. This became the pattern. Stories appeared. Harry's team identified factual errors. The Palace press office said corrections would only draw more attention. Better to let the story die naturally. But the stories did not die. They multiplied. Meghan's father gave interviews. Her half-siblings sold photographs. The tabloids called her Duchess Difficult before she was a duchess. They called her demanding, entitled, calculating. Every story cited anonymous Palace sources. Harry's team could not identify those sources. The Palace Communications Office said they had no control over what reporters claimed. Harry stopped believing that explanation in early 2017. The mechanism became visible when his private secretary received a call from a tabloid reporter. The reporter asked for comment on a story about Meghan's shopping habits. The private secretary declined. The story ran anyway, quoting Palace insiders who confirmed the details. Harry asked to see the list of people authorized to speak to press. The list was short. But the Palace employed hundreds of people across multiple households. Anyone with access to diaries or budgets or security logs could be a source. The leaks were untraceable by design. This was not a bug, it was a feature. The engagement interview in November 2017 was the first time Harry spoke about press treatment directly. The BBC interviewer asked if he had warned Meghan about media attention. Harry's answer was carefully worded. I tried to warn her as much as possible, but I think both of us were totally surprised by the reaction. Surprised was Palace speak. What he meant was, the Palace did not protect her, and I was not surprised by that. The BBC edited the answer for tone. It aired as reassuring. People who worked in the press office understood it differently. Harry had just signalled he was keeping score. The wedding planning revealed how the Palace prioritised tradition over accommodation. Meghan wanted her friend to give a reading. The Palace said only royals or aristocrats gave readings at royal weddings. Meghan wanted a gospel choir. The Palace said that was not traditional. Harry backed every request. Some were approved, some were quietly killed through procedural delay. The pattern was clear. Anything that deviated from precedent required approval from multiple levels. Anything traditional moved forward automatically. The message was institutional. We will accommodate you, but on our terms. Harry heard that message and calculated its implications. If they would not bend on a wedding ceremony, what would happen when actual policy was at stake? The wedding itself, on May 19, 2018, was a success by every measurable standard. 2 billion people watched. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive. Meghan's mother sat alone on her side of the chapel. Not a mistake, but a choice that emphasized her isolation. The photographs showed a black woman in a pale green dress, surrounded by white British aristocracy. The symbolism was obvious to everyone, except apparently the people who planned the seating. Harry noticed. He said nothing publicly, but he filed it away with everything else. The Africa tour in autumn 2019 was the high point and the turning point. Harry and Meghan visited South Africa, Botswana, Angola, and Malawi. They focused on conservation, women's rights, and landmine clearance. The coverage was positive. The Palace Communications Office briefed reporters that the tour was a success. Palace aides told friendly journalists that Harry and Meghan had found their feet. The subtext was, they were doing their jobs properly now. Harry read those briefings as condescension. The tour was a success because they made it a success, not because the palace allowed it. On the flight home, Harry spoke to ITV reporter Tom Bradby on camera. Bradby asked how Meghan was coping. Harry's answer was unscripted. Look, any woman, especially when they are pregnant. The fact that Meghan has been able to cope with the past 3 years and still be standing is a testament to her. But I will not be bullied into playing a game that killed my mother. The word bullied was specific. The reference to Diana was explicit. The Palace Communications Office was not consulted before the interview aired. They learned about it when everyone else did. The statement was clear. Harry was done managing his narrative through palace channels. The palace's response to Harry's statement was silence. Not strategic silence, confused silence. They had no prepared response because the interview violated protocol. Royals did not criticize the institution publicly. They certainly did not invoke Diana as a parallel. The silence stretched for 3 days. When palace sources finally briefed, they said Harry was fragile and emotional. The word choice was deliberate. It reframed his statement as personal struggle rather than institutional critique. Harry saw those briefings. He understood exactly what they meant. The counter-argument exists and deserves consideration. The palace was not a monolith. Different offices had different priorities. Buckingham Palace managed the Queen's schedule and legacy. Clarence House managed Charles and Camilla. Kensington Palace managed William, Kate, and Harry. These households competed for resources, media attention, and the Queen's favour. Harry's team was the smallest and youngest. They had the least institutional weight. When Harry asked for help managing Meghan's coverage, Buckingham Palace said it was Kensington Palace's responsibility. When he asked Kensington Palace, they said they had limited influence over what newspapers printed. Both answers were true. Neither was useful. William's role in this period is complicated by incomplete information. Harry has said publicly that William warned him not to rush into marriage. William has not commented. What is documented is this. In early 2019, William and Harry split their joint household. The official explanation was that Harry was starting his own family and needed separate staff. The unofficial explanation, reported by multiple palace correspondents, was that the brothers had disagreed about how to handle press coverage of their wives. William believed in the traditional approach: ignore negative coverage, maintain relationships with friendly reporters, play the long game. Harry believed that approach had failed Meghan and would continue failing her. Neither brother was wrong by the standards they were using. They were using different standards. The Queen's position was impossible. She loved both grandsons. She understood Harry's frustration. She also understood that the monarchy's survival depended on maintaining certain protocols. When Harry asked for permission to release his November 2016 statement, she was out of the country. The decision fell to Charles. Charles approved it, then faced criticism from Palace Old Guard, who said he had let Harry embarrass the institution. Charles defended the statement publicly. Privately, he told Harry it could not happen again. Harry heard that as, "You were right, but you cannot be right publicly." It was the exact logic that had governed Diana's treatment. Harry recognized the pattern. The historical precedents were not encouraging. Edward VIII abdicated in 1936 to marry a divorced American woman. The palace spent decades trying to minimize his role in history. Princess Margaret was blocked from marrying Peter Townsend in 1955 for similar reasons. She remained bitter for the rest of her life. Diana's divorce in 1996 stripped her of HRH status. The message across generations was consistent. The institution comes first. Individual happiness is negotiable. Harry knew this history. The palace assumed that knowledge would make him compliant. It had the opposite effect. The Commonwealth tour in 2018 took Harry and Meghan to Australia, Fiji, Tonga, and New Zealand. They visited 76 engagements in 16 days. The crowds were massive. The coverage was positive. Meghan was pregnant, which was announced at the start of the tour. Palace aides briefed that the pregnancy announcement timing was helpful for tour coverage. Harry read that as, they were using Meghan's pregnancy as a PR tool. The tour was exhausting. Meghan did not complain publicly, but Harry saw what the schedule cost her. He asked whether the palace would ease future schedules. The answer was, all royal tours are demanding. It was not a no, it was a non-answer. Harry understood the distinction. Archie was born on May 6, 2019. The palace's protocols for royal birth announcements were well established. The child would appear on the hospital steps within hours of birth. The mother would be dressed, made up, and smiling for cameras. Kate had done this 3 times. Diana had done it twice. Meghan declined. She wanted privacy for the first day. The palace press office said this broke with tradition. Harry said tradition was not mandatory. They compromised. A photo call, 2 days later, at Windsor Castle, with a small press pool. The photographs were lovely, but the tabloids ran stories about Meghan snubbing tradition. Palace sources declined to correct those stories. Harry noted the decision. The question of Archie's title became symbolic. As a great-grandchild through the male line, Archie was entitled to be Earl of Dumbarton. Harry and Meghan declined the title. They wanted him raised as a private citizen as much as possible. The palace accepted this, but under current rules, when Charles became king, Archie would automatically become a prince. Harry asked whether that was guaranteed. The palace's answer was carefully worded. The rules would be reviewed when the time came. Harry interpreted that as they might change the rules to exclude Archie. The palace insisted it meant nothing of the kind, but they would not guarantee the title either. The ambiguity was intentional. Harry saw it as racial. The palace saw it as constitutional. Both interpretations could be true simultaneously. The Sandringham Summit in January 2020 was supposed to resolve the crisis. Harry had sent a proposal. He and Meghan would step back from full-time royal duties, become financially independent, split time between UK and North America, and continue supporting the Queen selectively. The proposal was detailed, Harry's staff had worked on it for months. The Queen called a meeting. Herself, Charles, William and Harry. Meghan was not invited. She attended by phone from Canada. The meeting lasted 2 hours. No staff were present. No formal record exists. What is known comes from subsequent briefings and Harry's later interviews. The Queen's position, as relayed afterward, was that half in, half out would not work. Either they were working royals or they were not. The monarchy could not have members who were sometimes royal and sometimes commercial. It created conflicts of interest. It confused the public. It weakened the institution. These were reasonable institutional concerns. Harry's position was that the institution's needs had consistently outweighed his family's well-being. He was not asking to weaken the monarchy. He was asking to step back from it. The Queen heard this as abandonment. Harry heard her response as rejection. Neither was entirely wrong. The final break was administrative. The palace announced that Harry and Meghan could not use the word royal in any commercial context. Their Sussex Royal website had to be shuttered. Their trademarked Sussex Royal Foundation had to be dissolved. The reasoning was legal. They were no longer representing the Crown. Using royal would imply official status they did not have. Harry believed this was pettiness disguised as policy. The palace believed it was necessary boundary setting. The argument revealed how completely trust had collapsed. Harry assumed bad faith. The palace assumed defiance. Neither side could imagine the other acting in good faith. The final statement from Buckingham Palace in February 2020 was 94 words. It said Harry and Meghan were no longer working members of the royal family and would not receive public funds for royal duties. It said they were reprivileged to step back from royal duties, including official military appointments. The word required was striking, not choosing, not stepping back. Required. It made clear this was not Harry's decision alone. The palace had forced the issue. Harry read that statement and understood. The institution was drawing a line. You are in or you are out. There is no third option. He chose out. What this timeline demonstrates is not a single moment of betrayal, but an accumulating weight of small decisions. Each decision, taken alone, could be defended as reasonable institutional management. The palace had protocols. They had centuries of precedent. They had constitutional constraints. They were managing an institution that predated democracy and would, they hoped, outlast current controversies. From that perspective, every choice they made about Harry and Meghan was defensible. But Harry was not evaluating individual decisions. He was watching a pattern. The pattern was, when personal well-being conflicted with institutional image, the institution won. Every time, without exception. He had watched that pattern play out with his mother. He had watched it play out in the phone hacking scandal, when the palace chose institutional relationships over pursuing justice. He watched it play out when palace sources briefed against Meghan while refusing to correct false stories. He watched it play out when his family would not guarantee his son's title. The pattern was consistent. It was also, from the palace's perspective, necessary. The institution survived by prioritizing the institution. Trust requires believing that the other party shares your priorities, or at least considers them. Harry stopped believing the palace considered his priorities as anything more than inputs in a larger calculation. That belief was probably correct. The palace did not hate Harry. It did not want him to fail. But it would sacrifice his comfort, his wife's well-being, and his son's security if institutional interest required it. Not out of malice, out of duty to something larger than any individual member. The question is whether that duty justifies the cost. Harry answered no. The palace answered yes. Those answers are incompatible. They guarantee continued conflict because they flow from different understandings of what the monarchy is for. Harry believes it is, or should be, for the people in it. The palace believes it is for the country that needs it. Both positions have merit. Neither can accommodate the other. What Harry lost by leaving was significant. He lost military titles he had earned through service. He lost patronages he cared about. He lost daily access to family members he loved. He lost the protection of an institution that, whatever its flaws, had resources and expertise he could not replicate independently. These were not small sacrifices. They were the price of autonomy. Harry decided they were worth paying. What he gained was control over his own narrative. No more speaking through palace sources. No more coordinating statements with communications offices. No more calculating whether defending his wife was worth institutional friction. That control came with costs, financial, legal, and personal. But it was his. That possession, after years of having decisions made for him in the name of institutional necessity, mattered more than the costs. The palace's position is that Harry misunderstood how the system worked. If he had been patient, if he had played the long game, if he had accepted short-term criticism for long-term stability, the system would have protected him. This argument has historical support. The Queen faced enormous criticism in the early years of her marriage to Philip. Charles endured decades of negative coverage. Both survived by outlasting their critics. The palace believes Harry gave up too soon. Harry's position is that the system does not protect, it manages. Management is not the same as protection. Diana was managed until she became unmanageable, at which point she was excluded. Harry watched that exclusion and its aftermath closely enough to recognize the early stages when they appeared in his own life. He chose exit over repetition. Whether that choice was wise depends on what outcome you value: institutional continuity or individual well-being. The palace optimizes for the former. Harry chose the latter. If this account has been useful, subscribing to the channel costs nothing, and there are more stories like this one queued. The bell notification means you will see them when they go up. The royal family produces these stories with remarkable consistency, not because its members are more flawed than ordinary people, but because the institution they serve creates impossible contradictions. Being both symbol and human is a tension that cannot be resolved, only managed. Sometimes the management fails. Those failures are worth documenting. They explain how people who share blood and history can reach completely incompatible conclusions about what loyalty requires. The subscription button is there if you want the next chapter. Return to November 8th, 2016. The statement Harry released that day was 504 words. Most of it was procedural, describing types of coverage, legal actions already taken, concern for safety. But 3 sentences in the middle did something different. They named what was happening. This is not a game. It is her life and his. The word game is precise. Games have rules. Games have winners and losers. Games assume all players understand they are playing. Harry was announcing he had stopped playing. The palace, reading that statement, understood exactly what it meant. They had lost control over one of their own, not through scandal or incompetence, but through choice. The choice itself was not remarkable. People leave institutions every day. What made it significant was the reason. Harry did not leave because he was bored or ambitious or caught in scandal. He left because he stopped trusting the people who ran the institution to prioritize his family's well-being over institutional image. That distrust was earned through specific experiences over many years. The palace could have prevented it at multiple points. They chose not to, because preventing it would have required changing how they operated. The institution was more important than the individual. From the palace's perspective, that was the correct decision. From Harry's perspective, it proved his point. The space between those perspectives is where trust died. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but thoroughly. The moment Harry stopped trusting the palace cannot be isolated to a single event, because trust is not lost that way. It erodes through repeated small betrayals until the foundation collapses. By the time Harry recognized the collapse had occurred, reconstruction was impossible. The institution that had shaped his entire life could no longer contain him, so he left. The palace called it tragedy. Harry called it necessity. Both descriptions were accurate. Neither was complete.